I'm Rachel Vincent. I am the author of several series for both young adults and adults in a variety of genres, mostly sci-fi and fantasy. My latest release is Menagerie, which came out last week. It's for adults, and a couple months ago, my latest YA came out, The Stars Never Rise from Delacorte. But today, I'm here to talk to you with these ladies and gentlemen. First, we don't have Hannah. She'll be here soon. We're waiting for Hannah Moskowitz, who wrote A History of Glitter and Blood. And let's see, since she's not here, we will go with Sara Raasch. Sara is the author of Ice Like Fire. I'm going to let her introduce herself a little bit.
Yeah, I am the author of the Snow Like Ashes trilogy with HarperCollins. Book 2 actually comes out on Tuesday, but they have it for early pre-sale here, so if you guys want a copy, a few days early, it's here. It is about a 16-year-old girl named Mira, who is one of the last surviving refugees from the Kingdom of Winter, and she's trying to help the other refugees free their enslaved kingdom.
Thank you. Next we have Daniel Jose Older, author of, among other things, Shadowshaper.
Thank you so much. I wrote Shadowshaper, which is a young adult urban fantasy about a girl that brings murals to life in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, and Half Resurrection Blues, which came out last January, and its sequel, Midnight Taxi Tango, which is also a chick's kick-ass book. Thank you all so much for having me.
Up next, Melissa Gray, who wrote The Girl at Midnight.
Thanks, Nicole. So I wrote a book called The Girl at Midnight, which is the first in a trilogy. The second book, The Shadow Hour, comes out next July, so we're in for a bit of a wait. But The Girl at Midnight is a story about a girl named Echo who embarks on a quest to go find the mysterious and magical Firebird. There's magic, mayhem, and maybe even a little murder. Good morning.
Okay, up next we have Kim Harrison, author of The Drafter and many, many other books.
Hi, guys. Yes, I am best well known for The Hollows, but my latest embarkation is The Drafter, which is a sci-fi, thriller, suspense kind of novel where instead of magic, I'm using technology to make the world special. And it's about Perry Reed, I think she's in her mid-30s, top of her game. She works for the government as a special agent, but her job entails losing chunks of memory when she replays time. And she finds out, as the book goes along, that maybe she put her trust in the wrong person.
Thank you. I have a series of questions for our panelists, and when we have about 15 minutes left, I will open it up for you guys to ask questions, so be thinking of those now, because if you don't, I have to ask my backup questions. Okay, so one thing that fascinated me as I was reading each of your books is that while Kim and Sara wrote about women and girls who are actually trained to physically kick ass, you all wrote about strong, confident female protagonists who kick ass mentally and psychologically. Can you each tell us a little bit about your protagonist's particular kind of strength and why you consider that to be an important aspect of her character building? And if no one volunteers, I will call on someone.
I'll go ahead and start so we can keep an orderly thing. So my main character is Mira, and I think her greatest strength that was one of the first things that really shone through about her is she's very loyal. When Snow Like Ashes starts, she's never actually been to the Kingdom of Winter. They're living this like nomadic refugee type existence because it was overtaken by this neighboring kingdom. So even though she's never been there, she's still like unerringly loyal to Winter, and every goal, everything, every action she ever takes revolves around freeing this kingdom. And so all of her strengths always emanate from that one central loyalty. So that was always her main thing.
First, I wanted to say I'm honored to be on this panel because I know there's a plague of panels with male experts on women, from Congress to comics and everything in between, and like enough is enough, right? So, having said that, I take it very seriously that I've been allowed on this panel, and I take writing non-male characters very seriously. And for Sierra Santiago in Shadowshaper, a lot of the challenge that I really was trying to look at was how do we create a character that's badass on the one hand, but also a human being and vulnerable, and thinks about her hair and her looks too in a realistic and an honest way. So she has to overcome both sexism in her own community and then white supremacy from outside of her community as gentrification happens, and catcalls in the street and all these other things. So it's also about her finding her sense of self as a young woman of color, as a Black Latina, as much as it's about her defeating the bad guys and killing evil spirits and everything else.
So in The Girl at Midnight, Echo, prior to the book starting, she runs away from home at the age of 7. She leaves an abusive house and decides to make it on her own. And she eventually winds up living among the Avacyn, who are this magical race of creatures who live beneath the streets of New York. They're super cool. They have feathers for hair. I like them. But she gets sucked into this quest to try to find the Firebird, which is this entity that's prophesied to end this centuries-old war. And that's, the stakes there are so high, but the thing with Echo is that she's just a normal girl in this really crazy, over-the-top situation. So, you know, she's not a trained fighter. She's not, you know, your typical badass, but she has that sort of, that hardness that comes from having lived too much at such a young age. And that shows with her, I think, because she's not always nice and she's not always likable, and I'm really into sort of unlikable female characters. I think we need more of them. And, you know, she's a little bit rough around the edges, but I think that's her strength. And she learns how to wield the life that she's lived and sort of make herself tough through that.
So the question was, what makes them kick ass? Our characters kick ass? Is that the nutshell of it?
Yes, her particular strengths and why that is an important part of character building.
Well, Perry has the usual kick-ass characteristics. She's very athletic. She's highly trained. She's like a female Jason Bourne. But unlike Jason Bourne, she relies very heavily on her partner, who they're so closely, you know, they're together so often that it's basically a relationship where they're saving each other's butts all the time. So as kick-ass as Perry Reed is, she has a very strong vulnerability that she forgets chunks of time, especially, and it's the chunks of time that really matter. It's when somebody's shooting at you and all of a sudden you replay time to get, you know, so you're not getting shot at, and you lose that chunk of time and you rely on your partner to give that memory back to you. As the book progresses, we find out that's not always really what's going on. But I had to give her a lot of drawbacks because being able to manipulate time is such a strong ability. That's one of the reasons why I chose to have chunks of her memory taken away. But as I was developing her character, I realized that even though she was losing chunks of herself and relying on other people to supply them back to her, that her moral core wasn't changing. She was still herself. And I think one of my favorite characteristics of her is that she cannot stand a bully. Her life may be falling apart. She may not know who to trust. But if she sees some injustice, she's there and she's taking names.
And also kicking ass. Since both Melissa and Daniel mentioned women in this world and sexism, catcalls, and unlikable female characters, that leads me directly into a question I didn't plan to ask until later. So we'll start there now. In the real world, people tend to judge strength in terms of physicality, confidence, leadership ability, different for women than they do for men. Are there things that your characters do that you feel would be viewed differently by readers if the characters were male? And if so, do you consider that a pro or a con? And I will repeat that if you want me to.
Can I start with that one?
Yes, please.
My main character, Perry, she knits, okay? And she's fairly good at it. I'm better at it than she is, though, because I finish my projects and she never does. It's actually an Opti-approved stress relief. And if you do some research on knitting, they have found that knitting actually engages many, many parts of your brain. And it's kind of like a Zen-like when you get into it. So it engages your creativity, it engages your problem solving, and all wrapped around it is the knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, soothingness. So they've done a lot of studies and found that it really can pull you out of depression, it can just feel like you have control. So I thought that would be the perfect thing for Perry to have as her hobby. Now, if she were a guy, I don't think I could sell it. And really, knitting is not very kick-ass until you take a 6-inch knitting needle and jam it into somebody's thigh, and then it becomes kick-ass.
One comment that I got with Echo early on when I was trying to find a literary agent was, can you make her nicer? And like one of my favorite characters growing up was always Han Solo, and like the first word you would use to describe him is never ever going to be nice. Like I like those characters that are rough around the edges and a little bit roguish, and so when I was writing Echo, that was definitely where I was trying to go. Like, and sometimes she's sarcastic in the way that 17-year-olds can be, especially if you've lived a rough life, and she doesn't do it to be nice. She does it sort of as a defense mechanism designed to keep people at arm's length. Like that's the whole point of her saying the things that she does. And I think, I mean, we all know that if Echo had been a dude, if she had been Han Solo, no one would be like, but I think she's kind of mean. I don't know, because then it would just be a lovable scoundrel. But girls don't often get to be the lovable scoundrels. Right, they're just bitches. I mean...
Exactly. And yeah, in Shadowshaper, Sierra has the triple I policy about cute boys, which is ignore, ignore, ignore. And, you know, I feel like a lot of girl protagonists that we're given in literature are portrayed as getting just really obsessed and becoming all about a boy. And then the whole book is the romance. And it's hard, I think, for the characters to find a balance between, you know, finding themselves and being who they are and navigating the world, and being just completely in love with this dude who's taking over their whole world and everything is about the dude. So I really wanted to have Sierra struggle with that and find someone that she was interested in and that was really interested in her, not because of her body solely, but because of her talents and the fact that she has this magic to her and that she's a part of this spiritual world. And for her to really like go through the path of discovering that she cares about this person deeply, and you know, maybe they have a future together, and being thoughtful about it, but not just being like, the whole world is now about my obsession with this mysterious dude who knows everything. You know, that's boring. And also to have Robbie, who's the guy in the book, you know, be flawed and complicated too. And again, have his full humanity intact so that he's someone that she can really, you know, think about, like, is this a person that I want to spend time with? And, you know, not necessarily trust him right off the bat, because dudes are untrustworthy right off the bat.
Okay. So you guys may have heard of a recent book that was gender bent. Hear that? So when that came out, I started thinking of, how would Snow Like Ashes be different if all the characters' genders were flipped? And especially since Ice Like Fire is coming out, I realized much of the structure of Snow Like Ashes would be the same as it is, because in the Snow Like Ashes world, there are 8 kingdoms, and they each have a magical item that can either be used by a certain gendered heir. So there are 4 of them that have to have a female heir and 4 that have to have a male heir. And it really spread out the power dynamics in this world. In Snow Like Ashes, you only really encounter a male-blooded kingdom, so you get to see like a typical like tyrant-type king. But in the second book, we actually get to go to one of the female-blooded kingdoms, and everything that queen does is pretty much identical to how the male-blooded kingdoms would act. She's very ruthless and very controlling and very much like a bitch, like you said, that the female characters tend to be. So I think that's what I really liked about the Snow Like Ashes series, that I got to kind of mess around with a very interesting type of gender dynamics.
That is interesting, although I think that you did represent female power very well in the first book, because we see so much of Hannah in the flashbacks, which is the deceased queen. Right. I have an unplanned question. Why is it, do you think, that men can be scoundrels but women cannot be accepted? Why do we have to apologize?
Well, because you always hear boys will be boys, but you never ever hear girls will be girls.
Or
We're
if you
not
do, it's not a
forgiven
compliment.
for our trespasses. There's no leeway in how you're allowed to perform femininity, essentially. And definitely being a scoundrel is not classified as feminine. No one's going to be like, oh, you know, she hit that boy because she liked him, you know. It's the rules for us are different.
Okay.
Yeah, I think also along with that, writers or publishing in general has often created female characters for the male gaze, and that can make men uncomfortable. You know, when there's a woman that will speak her mind, or in theory it can. I don't think it necessarily does. It doesn't make me uncomfortable, but I think there's an idea that, you know, men don't want to read a female character that will, you know, whoop their ass intellectually and physically. It's like, you know, pick one. And so I think there's that based on that idea, you know, people have been kind of like taking their time, let's say, or anxious about putting out a female character that will, you know, truly kick ass in all those different ways or be unlikable, which is a great thing, I think.
Okay. Regardless of which kind of strength we're talking about, a character's strength develops over time, even if that time takes place before the beginning of the novel. Can you each tell us how your protagonists became such strong characters, or if they were introduced to us fully formed, how did they get to that point?
I can start if no one else wants to. So the question was, how do they evolve over the course?
How did she get so strong?
Yeah, I mean, I touched on it before, but I don't really go into a great amount of detail in the book about it because it's not what it's about. But Echo, you know, she ran away from home because it was a really hostile place and she wasn't safe. And I think you see with people who've experienced child abuse that there's a steeliness there that can't really be taught. You just sort of, you've endured something terrible and you know that if bad things happen that you can survive them too. There's a sort of confidence in that knowledge. So Echo definitely carries that with her throughout the book. And, you know, but I think one of the great things about writing is that you get to throw these people into hot water and sort of ask yourself how you would respond and how they would respond and how those things differ. And so when Echo starts, you know, seeing people die around her, things that, you know, she's known this war has been going on, but it's always been a hypothetical, and sort of seeing that hit home for her, I thought was a really interesting way to see how someone would evolve to those new situations.
I really wish Hannah was here because she has a similar theme in her book where the war is distance and only once it becomes personal do they really seriously get involved. So, Hannah, we miss you. Sure, anybody?
I can touch on that. Perry Reed, she's, like I said, she's in her mid-30s. She's at the top of her game. So most of her growing and evolving and gaining strength is in her past. Perry comes from a unique background that she has been recognized as special very early on. And she was adopted, sort of, by the government that went on to train her. So she has spent her whole life in the lap of luxury, basically. She has the best of everything, and she's earned it. Don't get me wrong, she has earned it. But if you have someone who can manipulate time, you're going to treat them very well so they don't go away to another country and let them use your special skills. So she's highly paid. She has a great job. She has the car. She has the latest gadgets. So her strength has grown from positive reinforcement rather than negative reinforcement, which I thought was rather interesting because when the rug gets pulled out from under her, I always wondered how would somebody react who's been given everything, who's earned it, but who sees life as everything's fine, everything's good, there is no bad. She knows it's out there because she's been battling it, but it doesn't touch her until the rug's been pulled out. And so, although she has a lot of personal strength before the crap hits the fan, it's not until she finds herself in a hard spot that she realizes how much strength she has. It's always been there, but she hasn't had to tap into it.
In Shadowshaper, Sierra finds out that her family has been involved with this whole legacy of this magical spiritual practice where they're bringing spirits and putting them into works of art and bringing the works of art to life. And the day after she finds that out, she also finds out that her grandfather was kind of the head of this whole thing and that he'd been keeping it from her entire life, but told her brother about it. So she has this kind of moment of truth where she's realizing that she is in some senses all alone in the world and one of the last people alive that's part of this tradition but doesn't even know that much about it. So she has to fight for her life and for the tradition. And she's been betrayed by it. So I think a lot of her strength, up to that point, she's just trying to get through and not get killed by these zombie dudes. But then there's this moment where she has to really take ownership of who she is and her own heritage, even as her heritage has not really been there for her. And to me, that's a big turning point for her, where she really has to take that stand and then, continue killing zombie dudes, but do it with a different kind of perspective in life.
Yeah. Mira's character arc has always been one of the founding storylines in the Snow Like Ashes trilogy, and a lot of the decisions she makes for her own personal self really rippled out throughout the rest of the storylines. Particularly in the second book, it's mostly about her growth from the things she learned in the first book. Because when she begins Snow Like Ashes, she's a refugee from this war. She's been displaced by it. It's always been a very prominent part of her life. But she never really saw the effects outside of her own little refugee group. So the more the story progresses and the trilogy progresses, and she starts to see how not only her actions affect other people, but how the war's actions affect other people, that's really everything that stimulates her growth, is realizing how much bigger the world is than she is.
As interesting as strengths are in a character, it's often vulnerabilities that tell us the most about her and her strengths. And in genre fiction, both these strengths and weaknesses tend to be pretty spectacular. Can you all tell us how your character's particular vulnerabilities helped shape her, and to what extent the rules of your fantasy or sci-fi world played a part in that? And soon I will ask just one question at a time.
Well, going off of what I just said about Mira's, how realizing that the world, the actions of the war affect the rest of the world. So her loyalty was her biggest strength, but it's also kind of her biggest weakness, because she's very, at the beginning of Snow Like Ash, is very kind of tunnel visioned on winter and just her people and this one little group she realizes. But that vulnerability often, it kind of blinds her to everybody else and all these other problems in the world. So when she realizes that, it kind of breaks her a little bit, and all these things that she can't juggle, and all of a sudden there's just a lot of pressure suddenly on her shoulders. So that's why it was so much fun writing her, is because her greatest strength is also her greatest weakness.
Yeah, connected to that and to what I was just saying about Sierra's kind of path, is that she starts out just knowing that something is amiss in her neighborhood and trying to figure it out and asking all the people that she trusts and cares about in her family, what's going on, as we do when we're confused, and just getting stonewalled everywhere. She really wants to believe, that people will be honest with her and let her know what's up. And then at this very particular moment, kind of midway, she just gets sick of everybody's shit. And then she just kicks ass in her own, right. And I feel like that's part of what her journey is to overcome, is just, having to rely on other people that aren't actually there to help her, and then figure out that, sometimes you have to go it on your own or find people that will.
I think Echo's, in some ways, sort of an inversion of that. She sort of assumes the worst about people and tries to do things on her own. She hears about the Firebird, and she's like, oh, okay, this thing people have been looking for hundreds of years. No problem, I'll go find it, whatever. So I don't need anybody's help, God. I'll do it myself. And so she sort of has to learn how to trust people as she works through the story. She sort of forms this ragtag group of misfits who are all looking for this one thing, and they're from different sides of the war, and she sort of has to let people into her circle, which she's kept very small by design. And it's complicated by the fact that she doesn't always think before she acts. She sort of just YOLOs her way through life. She's like, it'll be fine, I'll land on my feet, but sometimes you don't. And sort of she has to learn that the hard way.
I'm seeing a theme here. I'm just going to keep adding to it. Perry's, she falls down a lot on trust as well. But her problem is that she trusts the wrong people. Like I said before, I touched on before, she's had a great life. She has a great job. She likes the people she's working with, and there are no tells that anything is amiss. I mean, there's no reason to think anything is amiss, and so she trusts absolute. I've been looking back through my older body of work, and trust seems to be a reoccurring theme in my, in my work. So I am not surprised that it's in this one as well.
Sorry, I think that Perry was actually what I had in mind when I asked that question. Her vulnerabilities are sort of incredible and give us a great deal of empathy for her. Do you think that any of her strength comes from the fact that she can't trust what she remembers?
That is a huge drawback, and she's forced to trust because of her ability that causes the memory loss. She relies on, I looked at Alzheimer's patients in the early stages and they rely on the people around them. They rely on patterns of behavior. They rely on, what was the third thing? It's escaping me right now. Patterns. Oh, well, it'll come to me later. Obviously, Perry and I share a few more things. But she has to rely on the people in order to feel halfway normal. And that is one of the biggest stumbling blocks she has. But until there's an issue, it's not a problem. I mean, because she has this wonderful, sexy, smart man beside her who's filling in the gaps. And they're a perfect team. So it's like he's her hard drive, so to speak, her secondary hard drive. And but when that's gone, she has to find the strength within herself to let go and be able to exist in the moment as it is. And that's hard for a lot of people to learn and to deal with in the people that they're living with around them that suffer from memory loss.
Thank you. I think Daniel also had some Alzheimer's research in there.
Me?
Yeah, I was sort of struck by the fact that all of your characters are trying to figure out something and someone else has the information. And it's inaccessible either through a hard drive or through a grandfather with Alzheimer's or through lies that are being, told to you your entire, oops, that was probably a spoiler. No lies in Sarah's book.
Oh, man.
I thought that personally that all of your characters drew a lot of strength by just having to rely on themselves so much. As a follow-up to that, what were some of the specific world-building challenges in creating your sci-fi and supernatural abilities?
Role-building challenges?
Yeah, what made
I'm
it...
not sure what you're asking. I'm sorry.
Okay, let's see.
Creating the abilities or the world itself?
So it's sort of a vulnerability question for the world building. Just like characters have strengths and weaknesses, you also have to sort of temper the abilities of your world with the disabilities of your world. Were there any difficulties in that specifically?
So for most of my work is set in Brooklyn. So people always like, did you do research? And I'm like, I took a walk. And it's like the best research you can do, because that's where I live. So a lot of my world building is about trying to be really honest about what's happening in the world that we actually live in. Whether that's talking about gentrification, police brutality, street harassment, all these different things that are realities, but doing it in a way that doesn't preach about it necessarily, but just recognizes that that is a truth of the world that we inhabit, and would be a truth for the fictional characters that I deploy across that world. So, I think a book should be like a friend, and a friend tells you the truth, right? That friend doesn't protect you from the challenges of the world. It's like books and literature is there to arm us and to keep us strong so that we can face things. So a lot of my world building was about that, and that was how I went into it. And then there's the magic aspect to it, right? Because to me, like, I have so much fun just like imagining when I take walks, what if the memorial murals that people put up for folks who've died could speak back to us, or could move around and do things and, kill shit or whatever. So that was that's
That escalated quickly.
Yeah, my imagination does that. So that was kind of like where it all began, was this idea of just memorial murals set against a backdrop of a very real and vivid Brooklyn that's both true to the difficulties and challenges of urban life, but also true to the love and community that we find in communities of color.
Yeah, and more so in the Shadow Hour, which is not out yet and won't be for a while, but making the magical world and the magical ramifications of what happens in that world feel authentic in the real world was a challenge. No spoilers, but a major New York City landmark is attacked in the second book. And, I was, yes, mayhem. I was 15 years old when September 11th happened, and I remember, I was living in Manhattan, and it was very strange to see the sort of the atmosphere on the street when people felt like they were under attack, and sort of, even though what happens in the second book is a magical attack, you have this city full of millions of humans who are uninvolved with this, and, I tried to sort of get that authentic feeling of sort of despair and being afraid, and, you know, just from, again, like, people are like, oh, did you do research? I was like, I lived it.
Right.
I don't know. I live in the city. I don't know. You know, and sort of having your personal experience inform something, especially when there's magic going on. I think that's a sort of a tricky balancing act, but it's fun to do too.
Well, I can tell you what I had hardest with my world building.
Yes, please.
If you're familiar with the Hollows, it's an alternate universe where magic is possible. For the world building for that, I was able to make crap up. I mean, it was, the world was open. I could just make stuff up. This takes place about 15, 30 years in the future. So I couldn't rely on, well, hoverboards I might be able to do now, but I can't go with flying cars, I can't go with matter transporters, because we will not have those things in 15 years.
Oh, man.
So, no, I'm sorry, we will not have them. No, we're not going to do the Jetsons thing, sorry. So I had to find other ways to make the world look futuristic without being so far overboard that somebody's going to say, oh, no way. So I went and I looked at how we shop and how we communicate, and the idea of drones. Oh boy, we've got a big ride ahead of us figuring out how we're going to regulate those and what's possible and what isn't. So I delved into that, and so drones are a lot more prevalent. I've got glass technology, which you can see if you're watching TV shows or movies. They've got the glass. Well, she has a glass phone that rolls up in a tube and she can put in her pocket. So it's in shopping. We're going to have full life-size simulations that, if you pay enough, look exactly like you, and you just walk into a shop and give them your card, and your sim pops up, and you can dress your sim by leafing through the catalog, and you know, I think we could have that shortly. I really, really do. I want to shop where Perry shops. I want her car. It changes color, but you know, depending on how you run the electricity through it, it's a solar panel. The paint job is a solar collector. So, you know, we will not have that in 15 years. But I don't know. I live near Detroit, so maybe I could finagle something there. But the hardest thing was going from a mindset of I can create whatever I want to I need to look at what's out there and extrapolate 15 years. And that's a lot harder than you might think, because every time I came up with something, I would turn on the radio and, oh, we're going to have that next year. So that's been the hardest thing world building with this one.
I think the hardest thing for me in writing Snow Like Ashes was, so back when I was editing Snow Like Ashes, like 2 or 3 years ago, originally, like, my reasoning for the magic was, it's magic. Like, there doesn't need to be rules, right? No, apparently there needs to be rules. So my editor made me write, it ended up being an 8-page essay explaining the magic rules, because I'm apparently like pain. So the magic in Snow Like Ashes is stupid complicated, to the point where, like, I referred to that original list of rules just so I don't, like, stray or mess it up or anything. So that was definitely the hardest part of the Snow Like Ashes series. So I'm working on a new project now, and my one request for myself was, like, it's going to be the simplest magic ever. It's going to be one rule, and everyone's going to know it, and it's the only thing that happens, because, oh my God, the Snow Like Ashes magic was just, gave me such headaches.
Yeah, that's the thing about writing fantasy. It's like, it's so easy to explain it away with magic. My editor, Krista, who's wonderful, is sitting right there, and I know she's seen more than one note in the margins from me where she's like, well, how does this happen? And I'm like, damn it, it's magic.
Don't question things.
No, but how? And I was like,
Just believe.
just believe.
Oh, Tinkerbell's dying right now. Sarah, you started yours when you were in high school, right? So how much did...
Yeah, that was part of, so I started the first draft of Snow Like Ashes when I was 12, and that was part of why the magic system was so complicated, because at 12 it was the whole just believe thing, like, anything's possible, like, this magic can do everything. So I had to, like, connect all the things that it could do, and it's like, oh God, 12-year-old Sarah, what were you thinking? It's much better now, though, I promise. It is not nearly as bad as it was when I was 12.
All right, let's talk about supporting casts. Supporting characters often form the bond that keeps characters in extraordinary situations from losing their minds and sometimes their heads. and that's especially true in sci-fi and fantasy. To what extent do your protagonists draw their strength from a strong cast of supporting characters?
A lot. That's it. No,
Next question.
yeah, what else do you want to know? Right?
What do they gain from the supporting characters, if that's easier?
I had a lot of fun with the supporting characters in Shadowshaper. I love it when characters just stand up. You're just like, oh, I'm just gonna write like someone that can drive them somewhere, and then suddenly they're just like, no, the book is about me. Don't know why they're French.
Always in that voice.
They're always French. They're just suddenly French.
Those darn French.
Haitian. Yeah. No, so Sierra's world just kind of sprung up around her, and as many drafts, I rewrote this book so many times, but the characters around her were always kind of the anchor that really like carried through, like really to me kind of the heart of the book, because again, it's about community, it's about Brooklyn, and it's about the people that live in Brooklyn and what they're going through, and then her world and all the kind of different relationships to magic that those characters have, because I think that's fascinating. And like one thing I was interested in doing with Sierra specifically was having a character that doesn't spend the whole book just being blown away by the fact that there's magic and dead people walking around, because that just gets old to me when a character just spends like page after page being like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, my God. And I'm like, come on, get it, move forward. So that's part of Sierra's trajectory, and then the people around her kind of support that by not calling her crazy, and by thinking deeply about what that actually means when we call people crazy, and how dangerous that using that word as an insult is, and all these different issues that come up between them naturally, and then just banter. Like, I love writing banter, and I always have to pull myself back from having the characters just talking shit for like pages and pages and pages. But yeah, I had a lot of fun with
I'd
that.
read that.
I know. I mean, yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the supporting cast in The Girl at Midnight is so essential to the story. I mean, when I started writing the first draft, it was, first person, just about Echo, and it wasn't working, and I couldn't figure out why. And then I realized I needed to show the situation from, through different people's eyes. And so then Caius happened, and then Dorian happened, and Ivy happened, and Jasper was the throwaway character who was like, his whole purpose in the first draft of the book was to deliver pastries to Echo, and then he never showed up again, and now all of a sudden he has like this big heroic scene, and he's one of like the main characters in the Shadow Hour, and he just kind of was like, this is about me. Just like that.
He's French.
He is French now.
He's French now. Everybody's French.
Everybody eventually evolves
Amazing.
to Frenchness.
I support that.
But yeah, I like what you said about, having the beating heart of the book be this one character, but everyone else is sort of like the tributary, and the story doesn't exist without them. They're not just, set dressing. Like there are 6 or 7 point of view characters in The Girl at Midnight, like a lot. And something people ask me is like, how did you approach writing the secondary characters? And my answer is always, I never thought of them as secondary, because you could be a secondary character in someone's story, but you never think of yourself that way. You're always the protagonist of your own story. So, writing those motivations for each of those characters as if they were the main character, sort of, it just enriched the whole story and enriched Echo's story specifically.
Yeah, going into the backstory, like with characters and with like countries and cities and kingdoms as well, because kingdoms can be just as much of a character as the characters can be. So going into the backstory of all these things as an author can be really important. Even if the stuff never gets on the page, it's important for you to know it. So like, it helps you understand why certain people act the ways that they do, or why certain people from certain countries or kingdoms would respond to situations differently. So it just helps add that extra layer of richness to your story.
I also love the critique when people are like, man, those characters, I just wanted to know more about them. And like they say, like it's a bad thing. Like, you should want to know more about the side characters.
That's for the next book, though, right?
Right.
Yeah, they always show up. I like writing with very small casts. When I start developing the plot for a book, I've got a homemade piece of work of, I don't know what you'd call it. It's an Excel sheet. And I only have room for 20 characters on it. And if I have more than that, then I know I'm in trouble. And when I say 20 characters, I mean 20 characters. If somebody shows up only once in the whole book, they don't get on the list. But if they show up twice, there they are. And when you write with that much brevity of characters, a lot of your support characters are going to start doing double duty. The plus side to that is that they become very rich very fast, and they have their own identity very, very quickly. And the downside to it is that they want to tell their own story. Like you said, you had a throwaway character.
Yeah.
Anybody remember Kiston? He was a throwaway character. And I ended up having to kill him off after 6 books because he was not in my original idea, and he was getting in the way of my final goal. And by the way, sorry about that. Sorry about Kiston. So I like working with the short cast, which forces you to have your characters do double duty, and then they become very rich. It just works for me. Now, I have been writing for the past 10 years in first person, which means for me, one point of view. You see the world through that one character's eyes. I have since branched out, and this is in third person, and it has been a relief to be able to write from multiple POVs. However, I still like keeping it to 2 or 3, and if I can't find a way to have somebody else tell that scene, I will trash the scene and find a whole new way. I like the brevity of getting into only 2 or 3 people's minds.
Thank you. Daniel, you're the one who inspired that question. I was actually really impressed by Sarah's godfather.
Neville?
Yes. I would love to hear all about Neville, and I think the thing that impressed me most about him was his willingness to use the facts of his life, the cards he was dealt, fair or not fair, to his advantage, and it felt very much like that he passed that along to Sierra. Could you tell us about the briefcase scene and how you came across that?
That was so Neville is Sierra's godfather, and he's like the character that everyone has a crush on, the most crushed on character that I've ever written. And he's like this old guy, which is great, I think. And even characters in Shadowshaper have crushes on him, which maybe has helped inspire other people too. But he's just kind of like this cool dude that's probably a gang. I don't know. Most of us have someone in our life that's probably a gangster, but you're not really sure, and you don't want to ask because you might end up in jail if you know.
Or in the river.
Or in the river, right? Like he actually might have to kill you if he tells you. I've had people say that. Anyway, that's another story. So she has to basically break into Colombia at one point. So he goes up with her. He's like the guy that she calls when she needs help for breaking and entering type shit. Of course.
Everyone has that person on the phone, right?
Everyone should have that person too. It's usually the same person. So he, gets in his nice Cadillac, and they drive up together and have a chat about life and everything. And then she's trying to get in, but the security guard doesn't want to let her in because she doesn't have her student ID. And he's like, all right, let me handle this. And he takes his briefcase, walks over to the main lawn of Columbia, puts it down, and then walks away. And he's like, just chill. Meet me at the car when you're done. And she's like, what? And then all these security guards just start running out and freaking out, and people start running in the other direction, and everybody's losing their mind. And of course, the security guard from the library runs out too. And she's like, so then she goes into the library, gets what she needs, gets back in the car later, and she's like, Neville, what the hell? And he's like, look, a black man put down a briefcase in the middle of a bunch of white people and walked away. That is how you get it done. And that's actually one of the first scenes that I wrote in Shadowshaper, and it survived all those drafts because I was like, this needs to happen, and it needs to be in the book, and it needs to be in a YA book.
And that is such a New York thing. Like, if you see something, say something.
Right.
If you see something, run away.
Sometimes you have to take advantage of that shit and get what you need.
Yeah, that was my favorite scene. I have one more question for our panelists, and then we'll open it up for questions. So there's at least one Q&A mic, if you want to set your sights on that without trampling each other. Let's see. The women in your books are strong, but so are their romantic interests. What is the power dynamic like between your characters and their love interests, and do you think that dynamic has been a blessing or a curse, or both?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes.
Thank you.
What is the power dynamic like between your characters and their love interests? And do you think that dynamic has been a blessing or a curse for them or for you?
Well, in Snow Like Ashes, so Mira has 2 love interests, so this is a love triangle. The first one is a boy named Mather, who is the displaced heir of the Kingdom of Winter. And So that obviously puts a very interesting dynamic on their relationship because she's just some like nameless peasant who escaped the final battle, so she has like no status claim to be anything near him at all. And if the war had never happened, they never would have met. So that always puts this weird strain on their relationship, and the leader of their refugee group's always reminding her of this. And so it really puts her, she's constantly put in this place of like, okay, you're important because you survived, but that's it. Like you have no status, you have no, you're just a Winterian, you're just supposed to like stand over there while we do the hard work. And then the other love interest is the heir of another kingdom, so Mira's got all the princes, of a kingdom that comes to be an ally of Winter. And he treats her quite differently than Mather does, because Mather has feelings for her, but is always held back by the same loyalty that she shows to Winter, that like, okay, Winter comes first above everything. But the crown prince of the other kingdom doesn't feel that same loyalty because his kingdom's never been threatened by anything, so he's this kind of a different sense of security. So he's more willing to get down on her level and be more like, okay, yeah, I know that you don't have a title or anything, but we can still find some way to be equal. So the two very different dynamics and yet very similar, so it's always fun to play around with them, and it's always fun to see people's reaction to them because they're very, very similar, but yet still very different in their ways of happening.
Robbie is a Shadowshaper, and Sierra finds out very early on that he knows a lot about that world that she's been kind of deprived of information from. So early in the book, there's a lot of him, imparting knowledge to her and him kind of letting her in on these secrets that actually belong to her family, and that's the power dynamic at first. Plus, he's kind of the mysterious dude, and he's got tattoos all over him and everything. But as she comes into her power, that shifts a lot, and he sort of develops a little bit of an awe for her to see how quickly she suddenly becomes very powerful in the shadow shaping magic and all these other things. And so a lot of their dynamic is very dynamic in the course of the book. It's shifting, and I think that was something I was really intentional about, as far as like not having the dude just remain the all-knowing kind of master of everything type dude for the whole book, and to really have that challenged a little bit in the text.
In The Girl at Midnight, Echo starts out and she has a boyfriend, and it's someone she's known since she was really little, so, before anything, they're best friends. And then she goes off on this journey and, with the magic and the mayhem and the murder, and she changes in such a way that she's not the person that she was when she was with him. So he sort of represents the life that she's leaving and the life that she's evolving from, and she meets this other guy, Caius, who is sort of the direction that she's going in. He's sort of steeped in this magical world. He's a prince. He's killed loads of people in really dubious ways. And they sort of, Rowan and Kaya sort of act as these two poles of character development for her in a lot of ways. And, she sort of projects what she wants from herself, I think, onto both of them based on, like, I don't want to grow up and stop being this person that I was before, and I'm also scared of becoming this other person, but maybe I need to. And, they're sort of the reflections that she sees.
Perry has a couple love interests, but the one she starts out with is Jack, and he's her partner. And in the beginning, I would say it's a blessing that turns into a curse. She is a drafter and he is an anchor, and anchors are much more common, and he knows this. He knows that without Perry, the money goes away, the cars go away, the great apartment goes away, and so he's very keen on keeping her with him, her with him. Got my pronouns right there. So it is a blessing in the beginning because he knows what he has, and he wants to keep it, and he will do anything to keep it, which kind of makes him a wild card. I still don't, I'm done with book 2, and I still don't know what Jack's doing. I mean, he has his own agenda, but he knows what he wants. He just hasn't told me. As the story evolves, we have another love interest that starts to impinge on her from her past, and this one's a lot more complicated, and because it's more complicated, I think this is the one I like the best. So we'll see how that develops, but relationships should always be blessings and curses. If they're all one-sided, then it's no fun.
Thank you all. We have several questions queued up. I'd like to ask you each to please speak into the mic so that everyone can hear you, and we have about 10 minutes left.
Do I sound okay?
Sound great to me.
Great, okay. When you're writing for the YA audience, the subject matter can turn very dark. Child sees murder, abuse within the family, and so forth. My question is, do you have any rules of thumb for how much detail you decide to include? Have you ever submitted something and your editor's gone, oh, God, no, you can't write this? Thank you.
Yeah, all the time. So there was a particular scene at the end of Snow Like Ashes that was originally far more gruesome and like bloody and gory, and my editor made me cut a lot of the blood and gore because it's a YA thing. So that's always what happens though. I always write these like really gory, gruesome fight scenes, and my editor's like, no. So yeah, that's at least my case. My editor kind of tones me down a little bit, which is good because I go overboard.
See, I kind of write scenes expecting to get toned down, and then I don't, and I'm like, oh shit, let me say that.
That's going to
that's
print.
what's up. There's one part where like, I think she like pushes in a zombie's eyeballs, and then his head explodes all over her, and there's like ichor on her and stuff. She pulls a piece of zombie like goo off her, and it's like, there's no way this is, and it's in the book. So I don't know the answer to your question, but I try to have as much fun, but also give the gravity to life and death at the same time in a fight scene, and that's sort of the challenge. Is like, you don't want to just have people like blowing everybody away, but you want it to be challenging and exciting at the same time.
Yeah, no, I don't have any rules for that, and I don't get told to tone it down a lot. I think my editor and I are on the same wavelength a lot, which is really nice.
Believe it or not, I've also written young adult, and I don't think there are any limits. Your editor will kind of tone it down for you if you've crossed a line, but I think they're they would more likely, they'd want to see something pushing the limits rather than pulling you back. No matter if it's gory or sexually oriented or I'm not sure who I am or what my sex is, they want you to explore it, and if it's a good book, it'll get out there.
I wish Hannah were here to answer that question as well, because if anybody's read A History of Glitter and Blood, you will see that there are no lines. It all just depends on your audience, so definitely look for that book.
Hi. Oh, wow, this is loud. So first I want to say to Daniel Jose Older, I've been reading your writing a lot this year, and even though I'm not from Brooklyn, I'm from the Bronx, but your writing is like really awesome for me because I've always wanted to see New York that looks like the New York that I know. Right. And thank you for so I want to thank you for doing that. So my question is to all of you, because I'm an aspiring writer, even though I work in publishing. Anyway, so my question is, when you are writing your draft and then you're redrafting it, like at what point do you know that it's ready, or what point do you think that you're like, okay, this can go to an agent or an editor or whoever? Like, when do you hit that point?
When you hit your due date.
When your deadline happens.
That's when your editor demands.
When your editor's like, no more, I need it.
Well, what if you don't have like a deadline?
I think that's just experience. I mean, you have to read widely, and you have to just, be confident in the work and just, ask yourself, can I make this any better? And if eventually the answer is no, then, go for it.
And don't wait, because turn it in, even if you don't kill it to death, don't love it to death, because you're going to have to rewrite it at least once more for your editor.
Yeah.
So, you want to turn in your best work, but
don't wait for perfection.
yeah, don't wait for
Right.
perfection.
I think
yeah.
there's a kind of gut feeling that you get, and that's an annoying answer because it's very vague. But it's one that I think as you write more and more, you start to develop that like sense and trust yourself. And you want to aim for that and not aim for perfection, like they said. Perfectionism is death, and it doesn't help you as a writer. But do have beta readers, so you have some sense of, if your words are connecting with people.
Yeah, beta readers are definitely, they're wise.
Hello. I'm an aspiring writer. I'm writing a novel right now that's science fiction and young adult fiction, and I just sent it out to editors, and they got back to me saying, your protagonist needs to seem more real. In your professional experience and opinion, what do you think makes a character real?
Oh, geez.
I think giving them vulnerabilities, like we talked about, like
Took that right out of my mouth.
I think we were all ready to say that. Yeah, I mean, human beings aren't perfect. They have to have flaws. They have to be three-dimensional. They have to have conflict within themselves. So, I mean, I don't know your story. I don't know your character, but I think maybe sort of looking at what makes them tick might be helpful for you in seeing where they're weak versus where they're strong.
And it can't be that kind of flaw that you say in a job interview when you're like, I just work so hard.
I'm just such a perfectionist.
So good at what I do. That's my flaw. It's like human flaws. I try to think of characters like, you know, when you have a crush on somebody and there's just like something about them that's kind of magic that really pulls you in, and a lot of times it's the details. Like I try to write characters because you have but like a couple paragraphs to really get a character across. You know what I mean? Like you need to sketch them quickly. So it's helpful to think sometimes about like what is it about a person, you know, besides that they're fine. What is it about somebody that's like, ooh, I need to talk to that person? Like what creates that mystery? And then how do you delve into that as deeply as you can and really unravel them?
One thing I usually do when a character's starting to trip me up is, this is going to sound weird, you know those online personality quizzes, like the INFJ, I know. So I'll take one of those quizzes as if that's the character. You get this instant layout of like, this is all the character strengths and weaknesses, here you go. So it kind of does the work for you.
Like an eHarmony type of thing.
What'd you say?
Like an eHarmony type of thing.
Yes, exactly. Get an eHarmony profile for the character that's causing you problems.
That'll help.
That's a great question. Good luck.
Thank you.
We have about 5 minutes left.
Hi. So I grew up young adult, young now. You know, I loved Buffy. And like right now as an adult, I discovered, you know, maybe 10 years ago Michonne, and Michonne will bust that ass. And I love Princess Leia and Storm, but I also really love Glory as a villain on Buffy. And I love Gemma on Sons. And I love Cersei on Game of Thrones, and people don't necessarily like me for loving them. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about female villainy. You touched on it with not likable characters, but if you can maybe, I don't really have a question, I'm just sort of giving you a prompt, and maybe you'll work with it.
In Girl at Midnight, there's a character called Tanith, who's Caius' twin sister, and I love that you brought up Glory because I absolutely love that character. She's ruthless, she's blonde, she's beautiful, she will take no prisoners, and she will kill you if you cross her, and maybe if you don't, if she's just angry enough. And she was so fun to write. God, it was so liberating to just be bad and not apologize for it.
Yeah, Gemma is like an amazingly written character. I haven't finished watching yet, so don't tell me. But there's in Midnight Taxi Tango, which is the sequel to Half Resurrection Blues and comes out in January, there's a character that I ended up writing who was one of those characters that took over, and I hadn't planned on it at all, but she's a female antagonist, and she was so strong I gave her a chance to express herself in a bar one night. That sounds really weird. I gave her a scene in a bar where she gets drunk and just rattles off her whole philosophy of life. And I read it to my wife, and she was like, "You're fucked up." Sorry. She was like, "That's one of the scariest scenes I've ever read from you." And I write about like cockroach men and ghosts and everything else, but somehow her just getting deep into her philosophy. So she ended up being a primary character in the third book. But I just had a lot of fun with it, and I think that's the key: is like have fun and be weird.
Thank you.
Okay. We have time for one more quick question, but for those of you who did not get your questions answered, there is a signing directly after this panel. Come see everybody. We'll all be signing and perhaps answer a question. Go ahead.
All right. I was just wondering about something. When it comes to writing these kind of stories with all manner of characters, what do you love about it, especially when it comes to writing such fantastically complicated female characters in the lead? Sorry.
Well, I write to entertain myself. So if I'm not having fun writing it, I know you guys aren't going to have fun reading it. And that's pretty much the drive for me to write these strong female protagonists, or any strong protagonist. Just entertainment value.
And, you know, for me, I like writing characters who are better than I am, who are smarter, who are stronger, but it's also really freeing to write characters who are weaker, who will show those vulnerabilities that I'm afraid to show. You sort of get to be a whole slew of different people through your writing, which is really great.
I love it because it's true. And there's so many amazing women in the world right now. I grew up in a house full of amazing women, and I think about Bree Newsome, Ava DuVernay, Amanda Stenberg, who's upstairs today, Netta, all these amazing people. And I just feel like if we can reflect that in fiction, a little bit of that truth, then we're doing our job.
Yeah, I think growing up and reading, the main thing that I always loved the most, and the one thing I wanted to emulate when I write, is giving people a chance for the not only escapism, but also to help them ground themselves more in our world and to find aspects of characters in these books that they see in themselves that kind of assures them that it's okay to be certain ways, it's okay to be quirky and weird, and those can be strengths too.
Thank you all. You've been wonderful. Everybody, there's a signing in Hall 1B in 15 minutes.